4 weeks ago at my husband's family barbecue, his sister said something I will never forget. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. They thought it was just a joke. They thought I'd laugh it off like I always had. They were wrong. I simply raised my glass of sweet tea and said, "Challenge accepted." That night, I vanished from their lives. And what happened when I reappeared a year later changed the way they saw me forever. But to understand how I could walk away so easily, you need to know how I spent 7 years surviving as an outsider in that family. My name is Cassandra Blake, or it was, before I became Cassandra Weston. 32 years old, 7 years married to Derek Weston, heir to Weston Capital Management in Savannah, Georgia. Old money, 4 generations deep. The kind of family where your last name opens doors before you even speak. I wasn't born into that world. I grew up in a small town 2.5 hours away. My father fixed engines. My mother cleaned houses for families exactly like the Westons. I worked my way through university on a hospitality scholarship. I was confident, capable, and clear about my future. Then I met Derek at the country club where I worked part-time behind the bar, and slowly, over 7 years, I disappeared. The pattern inside that family was always the same. Brittany would correct my pronunciation at dinner tables. Gloria would make wardrobe suggestions framed as concern. Douglas would explain basic business concepts to me as though I had never attended university. I was always seated with the elderly relatives or the distant cousins visiting from out of town, never included in real family discussions, never acknowledged as someone whose opinion carried weight. I became infrastructure, necessary for functions to run smoothly but invisible as a person. I remember who I was before all of that, president of my University Hospitality Association, confident, opinionated, someone professors genuinely believed in. Somewhere inside the Weston world, that woman had quietly vanished. The real breaking point came at the annual Weston Family Summer Barbecue. I'd spent the entire week preparing. Menu coordination, floral arrangements, table settings, every detail calibrated to what Gloria, my mother-in-law, called Weston standards. Derek had left early for golf with his father, Douglas. "You'll handle everything, right?" he said, kissing my forehead absently. "You always do." I did. I always did. By noon, I'd been at the estate for 4 hours, setting up, adjusting, perfecting. Gloria walked through twice, making small corrections, moving centerpieces, swapping my linen napkins for hers. "Not quite Weston standard, dear," she said. Not unkindly, just matter of fact, like I was staff receiving feedback. I had brought my grandmother's peach cobbler. 3 hours to make. The one dessert that always received genuine compliments. Within minutes, Gloria moved it to the back. Her daughter Brittany's store-bought tiramisu took center stage. At the main table, I was seated beside a hard-of-hearing elderly uncle and an empty chair reserved for Brittany, Derek's younger sister, who arrived late as always. She announced her wedding venue booking loudly enough for the entire patio to hear. The table erupted in congratulations. Gloria beamed. Then there was a rare lull in the conversation, and I took it. I mentioned I'd actually coordinated an event at that same venue the previous year and offered vendor recommendations. Brittany cut me off mid-sentence with a smile so sweet it burned. "Oh, Cassandra, that's adorable, but we're working with premier vendors, not the budget level you usually deal with." Light laughter rippled around the table. I tried again. Brittany interrupted with a theatrical sigh. "Honestly, if you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. We'd still have a perfect wedding. Douglas would still run the business. Derek would still." Another dismissive wave. "Everything would be fine." The table erupted, not in shock, not in my defense, but in laughter. Gloria tittered behind her napkin. Douglas grinned. And Derek, my husband, chuckled into his beer. Something inside me went very still, very quiet, very clear. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene they could later call evidence of my instability. I raised my glass, locked eyes with Brittany, and said clearly enough for the entire table to hear, "Challenge accepted." A brief, confused silence fell. Then Gloria chirped about the brisket being carved, and the moment passed. They went back to their conversations, their laughter, their perfectly maintained world. But something in me had fundamentally changed. For the rest of that afternoon, I didn't participate. I simply observed. I watched how effortlessly they moved through their assumed privilege, how Derek blended seamlessly with his family, occasionally throwing me an absent smile. I cataloged every dismissal, every moment I had been spoken over or spoken around. And I listened to a voice inside me that had been whispering for years. Finally, it was loud enough to hear. You deserve better than this. That night, after Derek fell asleep, I walked to my home office, opened my laptop, and began planning my disappearance. Not dramatically, not emotionally, methodically. By 3 a.m., I had a plan. Apartments in Charleston, divorce lawyers in Savannah, a clear inventory of what was mine. By 6 a.m., I would execute it. The next morning, Derek left for golf, and I called my college roommate, Lauren. She answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. Cass, it's 6 in the morning. I need help, I said. I'm leaving Derek today. Silence. Then just, what do you need? Not, are you sure? Not, have you thought this through? Just, what do you need? She arrived 2 hours later with coffee, tape, and boxes. We packed only what was mine. Not the vases Gloria had gifted us. Not the furniture chosen by committee. Just the pieces that felt like me, my professional portfolio. Photos of my parents, my grandmother, my graduation, my grandmother's handwritten cobbler recipe, carefully folded into a folder. I transferred exactly half of our joint savings, not a penny more. I wrote a check for my share of the upcoming bills and left it on the counter beside a single printed sheet bearing Brittany's exact words. The date, the location, and the number of witnesses. Then I took off my wedding ring, set it on top of the letter, and walked out to the driveway. My entire life fit in the trunk and back seat of my car. Lauren led. I followed. When we crossed the state line into South Carolina, I took my first full breath in what felt like years. Each mile felt like weightlifting from my chest. I wasn't running away. I was finally running toward something. Charleston welcomed me with 3 days of steady rain. Lauren had found me a furnished studio with creaky floors and a bay window overlooking a quiet courtyard. After the sprawling suburban house I'd shared with Derek, it should have felt small. Instead, it felt like mine. I opened a new bank account at a local credit union. I bought a new phone with a Charleston area code. I updated my professional profile carefully, removing anything tied to Derek's network, highlighting 7 years of independent event work. Within 10 days, I'd applied to 15 positions. One response changed everything. The Ivory Terrace was a boutique hotel and event venue in downtown Charleston. The owner, Margaret Calloway, was direct in a way I hadn't experienced in years. She didn't want to see my resume. She wanted to see work I'd created purely for myself. I pulled up a folder I hadn't opened in 5 years. Concept designs, experimental color palettes, layout ideas I'd sketched late at night before I learned to second-guess everything. Margaret studied them in silence, then looked up with sharp eyes and said, "You've been hiding. These are really good. When can you start?" The offer was operations manager at a salary nearly double what I'd earned in Savannah. For the first time in years, someone was paying attention to what I actually brought to the table. I also found a therapist named Dr. Patricia Monroe. She helped me understand that Brittany's comment wasn't the cause of my departure. It was the catalyst. She helped me trace it all the way back. The first time Derek said I wouldn't understand a business discussion. The first time Gloria adjusted my clothing without asking. The first time Brittany laughed at something I said and everyone joined in. Week by week, session by session, I unpacked 7 years of quiet erosion and began rebuilding from the foundation. Dr. Monroe once asked me, "What did you do when these things happened?" "Nothing," I admitted. "I thought that was how they showed love." She looked at me gently and said, "That was not love. That was tolerance. And tolerance is never enough." By month 7, Margaret offered me a partnership in a historic waterfront property that had just gone into foreclosure. 30% equity in exchange for managing the full acquisition and renovation. 3 months of contractor meetings, layout redesigns, and late nights walking through gutted rooms, visualizing what they could become. We opened in early August, the first wedding booked within a week. By month 1, we were fully booked for the next 18 months. By month 13, my combined income was nearly triple what I had made in Savannah. I'd cut my hair, refreshed my wardrobe, and most importantly, I stood differently. I held eye contact. I voiced opinions without waiting for permission. I had stopped shrinking. Then fate delivered something I hadn't planned for. 6 weeks before Brittany's wedding, a kitchen fire destroyed her booked venue. Her wedding planner expanded the search to 100 miles and found us online. One miraculous August Saturday still available. The inquiry came through our website. Client name, Brittany Weston. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Then I typed a standard professional response. Full pricing, clear terms, no discounts. The contract was signed 2 days later. She had no idea who owned the venue. She had no other choice. I reviewed every detail of her wedding personally. Not to sabotage, to perfect. Because our reputation mattered more than personal history. And because I wanted her to see exactly what I was capable of when I was finally visible. Every flower arrangement, every lighting cue, every table setting was handled with the same care I had always brought to the Weston family events. The difference was that this time, my name was on the door. On the day of the wedding, I arrived at 6 in the morning. Every space was flawless. At 5:45 that evening, I walked into the reception hall in an emerald green dress. Bold, distinctive, entirely me. Brittany saw me from across the room. Recognition moved across her face in slow motion. Confusion, then certainty. I walked calmly to her table, introduced myself as Cassandra Blake, co-owner of the venue, and said I wanted to personally ensure everything met her expectations. Silence fell across both the bride's table and the family table. Derek stood up abruptly. Gloria's champagne glass froze midair. I looked directly at Brittany and said, "You once told me that if I disappeared, no one would notice. You were right about one thing. I did disappear from a life where I was invisible. What you're experiencing tonight, every detail, every flower, every perfectly timed moment, this is what I am capable of when I am actually seen." Then I turned and walked away. Calm, composed, completely unbothered. Later that night, Margaret found me in my office. "You never made yourself smaller to make others comfortable," she said. "Not here, not once." I told her I had for 7 years. She looked at me steadily and said, "But not anymore. And that is what matters." I sat back in my chair and realized she was right. The woman who had once rearranged herself to fit inside someone else's expectations was gone. In her place stood someone who had built a life entirely on her own terms. The best response to being invisible is not demanding to be seen. It is finding the light where you already are. Sometimes the people who make you feel small are simply showing you that you are in the wrong room. The answer was never to fight harder for a seat at their table. It was to build your own and make it beautiful. Because the life you are meant to live is waiting on the other side of the courage to walk away from the one that is making you small. Cassandra Blake disappeared from their world entirely and built her own. And Charleston was paying very close attention.